This video contains content that may disturb you and challenge your perception of reality. Ensure you're in a safe space before you continue. Hello, and welcome to Horror Flix. I'm Charlie. 3 stars, 3 accusations, 3 trials that shook the world to its core. O.J. Simpson, Phil Spector, Robert Blake. Their fame was unmatched, but behind the cameras lurked something sinister. Murder, mystery, media mayhem. What happens when the American dream becomes a true crime nightmare? Stick around, because tonight we walk into the darkness with Hollywood's most haunted men. O.J. Simpson, from famous to infamous. He was more than an athlete. O.J. Simpson was a phenomenon. A record-smashing NFL superstar whose name was etched into football lore and whose charm lit up Hollywood screens. He was that friend you'd want at your barbecue, the TV persona who could do no wrong. Off the field, he'd parlayed his fame into commercials, movies, and guest spots. Unshakable, untouchable, a living legend. Yet behind the grin, there was a private life hidden from the spotlight. Married to Nicole Brown Simpson, a vibrant, beautiful woman adored by many. Their union seemed picture perfect until whispers began. Late-night calls from frightened neighbors, bruises hidden beneath long sleeves, hushed conversations about a rage simmering beneath that charming exterior. In those private moments, the veneer of celebrity cracked, revealing an unsettling truth. Domestic violence was the secret they all ignored. Then came June 12th, 1994, an ordinary Sunday night that turned Los Angeles into a city of nightmares. Nicole and her friend Ron Goldman, a young waiter in West Hollywood, met a fate so brutal it would scorch across headlines for decades. Their bodies were discovered in a quiet Brentwood alley, left grotesquely illuminated by the stark beam of a crime scene photographer's flash. Nicole's arms cradled her wounds as though seeking comfort, her blood seeping into the grass. Ron lay face down on the sidewalk, his final moments forever frozen in time. The bullet slashes and slits told a story of rage and finality, a horror scene carved into the very heart of a city that prided itself on glamour. The morning sun rose over a crime scene that defied comprehension. And then, something no one saw coming. O.J. Simpson, the man everyone believed to be beyond reproach, was the prime suspect. But instead of surrendering to police, he hopped into a white Ford Bronco, flanked by his friend Al Cowlings, and set off on a slow-motion flight across the Los Angeles freeways. Choppers hovered overhead, live cameras captured every brake light, every panic-stricken turn, and fans across America witnessed the surreal chase that seemed ripped from the pages of a nightmare. For more than an hour, the Bronco crawled through gridlock, tinted windows hiding its famous passenger and his shotgun, a grim echo of the violence that had just claimed 2 lives. When he finally stopped, the man who once ran triumphant touchdowns was led out in handcuffs, the laughter of fans replaced by stunned silence. The chase was over, but the real horror had only just begun. What followed was the spectacle that would be immortalized as the trial of the century. Courtroom doors burst open to cameras, reporters screamed for every soundbite, and the nation tuned in, riveted by a drama that blurred the line between justice and reality television. On one side stood prosecutor Marcia Clark, poised and relentless, determined to piece together a case from blood spatter, bloody gloves, and DNA samples that pointed straight at Simpson. On the other sat Johnny Cochran, the smooth-talking defense titan who could weave doubt like a web. Cochran's most chilling aria, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit," whispered in that courtroom as Simpson struggled to pull on a blood-soaked glove. An image that seared itself into the collective memory. Evidence stacked high. Hockey mask gloves found at the murder scene and his estate. Strands of Nicole's hair on Simpson's Bronco. His blood at an entryway. A timeline that placed him within minutes of the killings. Yet every piece had its crack. Questions about police contamination swirled. The LAPD's tortured history with race relations flared in public debate. And the defense painted Simpson as the victim of a racist conspiracy. Each argument slammed into the next like waves against a cliff, chipping away at certainty. With every twist, the trial became less about facts and more about fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of power and race, fear that justice might slip through the cracks. When the verdict finally came, it echoed like thunder. Not guilty. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom and then across the nation. In white-knuckled living rooms, some cheered, convinced they'd witnessed a triumph over a prejudiced system. Others wept, their faith in justice shattered, convinced that fame and money had bought a get-out-of-jail-free card. The streets split along fault lines. Racial division ripped wide open. Families tore themselves apart at dinner tables, debating the outcome. Talk shows buzzed with outrage. Tabloids plastered headlines in garish fonts, and the name O.J. Simpson became synonymous with the darkest shadows of the American dream. But the nightmare didn't end there. In 1997, a civil jury convened under a lower standard of proof, more likely than not, rather than beyond a reasonable doubt. The families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman stood before new jurors, this time armed with the same gruesome evidence that had failed to convict him criminally. And this time, they won. A staggering $33.5 million in damages was levied against Simpson, a hollow victory that forced him to confront the crushing weight of responsibility he had evaded in criminal court. The civil verdict was a grim reminder that in America's fractured system, you could walk free in one courtroom only to be condemned in another. Simpson's fall from grace was brutal. The hero once idolized by millions became a symbol of betrayal and unchecked power. His career evaporated, sponsorships vanished, and the public turned its back on the man who had run the perfect route on the field. Tabloids picked apart his every move, and conspiracy theories sprouted like rot in a field of decaying leaves. Some argued that Simpson really was innocent. Others whispered that the trial was rigged by celebrity privilege. But beneath the debate, one truth endured. 2 people were dead, and the city's faith in justice had been devoured by spectacle. For years afterward, Simpson remained ensnared by his darkest hour. He faded from TV to tabloids to prison. A final twist of fate when, in 2007, he was convicted in Nevada for armed robbery and kidnapping, sent to a cell miles from the life he once led. He paroled in 2017, a ghost haunted by memories he could never escape. The O.J. Simpson saga tore at the fabric of American culture. It exposed a nation that worships its heroes until they fall, then punishes them twice over for the same crime. It revealed how media can morph a tragedy into a carnival ride, and how race and wealth distort the scales of justice. Simpson's story remains a cautionary tale. When fame becomes a facade, the true horror isn't the blood that stains the hedge, the madness in Phil Spector's mansion. He was a maestro of sound, the man whose wall of sound revolutionized pop music and gave the Ronettes their thunder. He nurtured legends, the Beatles, Tina Turner, Leonard Cohen, wrangling notes and emotions in a Los Angeles mansion that seemed to pulse with creativity. But behind the gilded facade and silver headphones, Phil Spector was as volatile as any master temper. He collected firearms like trophies, snapping photos of himself with guns lined up on his mantle. Friends whispered about his odd behavior, outbursts, grandiose claims, and a chilling fascination with violence. To many, he was a genius. To others, a ticking time bomb. On a cold February evening in 2003, the world outside Spector's home in Alhambra, California, was quiet. Inside, his housekeeper discovered the life of actress and hostess Lana Clarkson, or what remained of it. She was slumped against the rich wallpaper, one hand clutching a telephone, lipstick smeared like a sinner's confession. The single gunshot wound lay at the center of her jaw, the barrel pressed so close it left powder burns like a brand. The shock was immediate. This wasn't some tragic accident on set. It was a grotesque punctuation to a night meant for glamour. Moments before, Spector himself had made a frantic 911 call. "I think I killed somebody," he whispered into the receiver, his voice a quiver between fear and defiance. "I shot her in the mouth." When paramedics arrived, Spector paced the lawn, his black hair tousled, his gaze empty. In a separate whisper, he confessed to a friend that Lana had made an obscene sexual proposal, and he'd pulled the trigger in a moment of panic. But panic doesn't explain why she lay silent in his grand foyer, or why the barrel was pressed so precisely. The scene froze the glimmering LA dream in a snapshot of terror. Detectives swept through Spector's mansion like archaeologists at a crime scene, unearthing the twisted interplay of glamour and gunfire. They discovered that Spector's infatuation with weapons wasn't idle play. He'd once chased his girlfriend down Sunset Boulevard with a revolver, and another acquaintance told of being held at gunpoint when refusing an invitation to stay the night. In court, his attorney would try to frame these incidents as harmless eccentricities. Prosecutors saw them as a chilling pattern of intolerance for no. Inside the courtroom, a battle of experts raged. Forensic specialists leaned over glossy photographs tracing the trails of powder burns on Lana's dress. They argued about trajectory, distance, whether the angle suggested self-inflicted harm or an execution-style shot. One expert, called by the defense, claimed that Clarkson had committed suicide, an alibi as fragile as dried cigarette ash. Prosecutors pointed to the pistol's muzzle imprint and the lack of hesitation wounds, calling it murder. Every detail was magnified: the bullet's path, the lack of fingerprints on the weapon, even the grain pattern on the floorboards. On one side stood Spector's team, insisting that fear had driven him to self-defense. On the other, the state, determined to prove cold-blooded intent. Throughout the proceedings, Spector sat like a fallen titan, his once commanding presence reduced to a scowl and a haze of anger. He ranted about betrayals, about how justice was rigged against him. His eccentricities, which had once seemed harmless in a studio, now felt monstrous under the harsh courtroom lights. Questions swirled. Did Lana really threaten him? Or had he, in a fit of rage, staged her death as something else? The jury watched, transfixed as the evidence mounted. But jurors are human, and fear can cloud any verdict. When the first trial ended in 2007, the jury was deadlocked, hung on a knife's edge of doubt. Some believed Spector had snapped. Others worried that the prosecution hadn't proven motive beyond a shadow. The result was less triumph for the defense than a haunting unfinished symphony. Lana's killer still free, her grave unavenged. The public outcry was immediate. Headlines screamed about justice denied, and talk shows debated the shadowy nexus of fame, wealth, and violence. But the story did not end there. In 2009, a second jury convened, determined to break the standoff. This time, prosecutors tightened their case, bringing new witnesses, reinforcing forensic testimony, painting Spector's previous outburst as more than quirks. They wove a narrative of control and rage, arguing that Spector's wall of sound extended to the walls of his mansion, a barrier against any refusal. After weeks of graphic testimony and gavel-banging drama, the jury delivered a verdict that crackled like a gunshot in the silent courtroom. Guilty of second-degree murder. When the sentence was handed down, 19 years to life, it was as if the entire music world shuddered. The man who had given voice to generations of pop anthems was now condemned to spend the rest of his days locked behind concrete walls. Lana Clarkson's fleeting career, her final moments frozen in a bullet's kiss, had finally found a measure of justice. But for spectators, the outcome was bittersweet. The thrill of the verdict could not erase the horror of the crime, nor could it bring Lana back. In prison, Spector's world narrowed to the low hum of fluorescent lights and the clink of bars. His death in 2021, at age 71, closed the final chapter of a life racked by genius and violence. Some mourned the loss of a musical pioneer. Others felt the darkness had finally swallowed its victim. His legacy became as tangled as his trial, a testament to the power of art and the perils of unchecked rage. The Phil Spector saga stands as a grim counterpoint to the glittering success he once enjoyed. It reminds us that behind the biggest hits and brightest lights, there can lurk a storm of secrets. In the end, Spector's mansion fell silent, not to the echo of a symphony, but to the memory of a life cut short by a single, terrible shot, the haunting case of Robert Blake. The night of May 4th, 2001, began like countless others in Los Angeles. Bright lights, the hum of traffic, and the promise of a city that never truly sleeps. But for Robert Blake, it would end in bloody chaos and forever alter the landscape of Hollywood justice. Blake, the steely-eyed actor best known for donning a leather jacket as Detective Tony Beretta, was accustomed to fighting crime on screen. Off-camera, however, his life was fracturing. His marriage to Bonnie Lee Backley, a tinderbox of tension, suspicion, and simmering resentment. Their worlds, his world of scripted heroes and her world of relentless pursuit of fame, were on a collision course with tragedy. Bonnie Lee, 20 years younger than Blake, was more than a wife. She was a drama seeker with a history of relationships fueled by promises and betrayals. She craved attention, often flirting with men in public, demanding gifts, and weaving stories designed to keep her name in the spotlight. Blake, having retreated from the frenzy of early stardom, found her behavior exhausting and unpredictable. Friends who once admired his calm confidence now saw a man increasingly isolated, walking hand in hand with mistrust. The tension mounted beneath the glitz, an undercurrent that would explode into murder on that spring evening outside a modest Los Angeles restaurant. They had stopped for dinner, but only Blake ate. Bonnie Lee, ever the provocateur, ordered appetizers for two. Blake embraced his legal freedom, but the acquittal offered no solace to a public divided. Some cheered his exoneration, convinced the state had twisted justice for a headline. Others seethed, certain a killer had slipped through the cracks. But the story did not end there. Bonnie Lee's children pursued a civil wrongful death suit, where the burden of proof was lower. In that arena, Blake's acquittal meant little. In 2006, a civil jury found him liable, slapping him with a $30 million judgment. Gone were the courtroom theatrics, replaced by stark financial ruin. Blake's assets, homes, investments The remnants of a once lucrative career were seized to satisfy the verdict. The man who once solved crimes on television now faced his own decrepit life of debt and desolation. The aftermath was devastating. Hollywood doors closed forever. Offers vanished. Mentions of Blake's name in scripts became taboo. His face, once synonymous with suave command, flickered only in reruns and tabloid exposés. Attempts to reclaim dignity, hiring private investigators, publishing memoirs, fell flat against the public's enduring suspicion. Blake, once a figure of admiration, became a cautionary tale. Fame can shield you from criminal conviction, but it cannot save you from the court of public opinion or the relentless machinery of civil justice. To this day, viewers debate whether Robert Blake was a man driven mad by marital strife or a sinister force cloaked in Hollywood charm. His career downfall and the chilling legacy of 2 trials, one criminal, one civil, offer a stark reminder that in the shadows of glamour, darkness can lurk, waiting to snatch the light, and when it does, justice itself can feel like a horror story written in real time. In the twisted lore of celebrity crime, Blake's saga stands as a sentinel of dread. No amount of fame can inoculate you against suspicion. No amount of craft can defend you from whispers of guilt. The bullet that felled Bonnie Lee Bakley echoed far beyond a single kill. It reverberated through a star's once bright life, forever staining his legacy and reminding us that sometimes the greatest monsters wear the faces we trust most. So, what do O.J. Simpson, Phil Spector, and Robert Blake really have in common? Not just murder charges, not just notoriety, but something far more chilling. They were once beloved, faces we trusted, names we admired. But when the lights dimmed and the blood was real, the courtroom became their stage, and America watched. Each stood accused of unimaginable acts. Each walked away from criminal conviction, but not a single one walked away clean. Their stories remind us, the darker the fame, the deeper the shadows, and in those shadows, something still stirs. Now I leave the final verdict to you. Was it justice, or just another Hollywood illusion? Let me know in the comments, and if you thought this was the end, think again. Hit that subscribe button, because horror never sleeps in this house. Turn on the lights, or don't. Either way, I'll see you at the next one.